When life feels heavy, it is often not the world that has changed but the energy we carry within. There is a simple practice using salt, a symbol of purity and grounding, that reminds the mind how to release negativity and return to balance. Take a small bowl of clean salt. In stillness, place your hands above it. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. With each breath, imagine all frustration, fear, and doubt leaving your body and dissolving into the salt. This is not magic, it is awareness. Salt has long been used as a symbol of cleansing. Just as it preserves and purifies, it reminds us that we too can purify our thoughts. When the mind is crowded with negativity, even opportunities feel blocked. But when the inner space becomes clear, life begins to respond differently. Now gently set your intention. Not with greed, but with openness. I release what weighs me down. I welcome clarity, peace, and rightful abundance. Place the salt near your door or in a corner of your space. Let it stand as a silent reminder that every day is a new chance to reset your energy. Good fortune is not something chased, it is something allowed. When the mind is calm, when thoughts are kind, when actions are mindful, life begins to flow with ease. And in that flow, what once felt like bad luck slowly dissolves, making space for steady, quiet blessings to enter. Inner energy shapes experience. Life feels blocked or heavy, not because of external forces, but because of negative thoughts, fear, and emotional weight within us. When a person feels that life is not moving in the right direction, it is often believed that something outside is blocking their path. But in truth, the real blockage is usually inside the mind. Thoughts that are heavy, repeated worries, past disappointments, and constant fears slowly build an invisible burden within us. This burden changes how we see everything. Even small problems start to feel big, and even good opportunities start to feel out of reach. The first key understanding is that our inner energy shapes our outer experience more than we realize. If the mind is filled with negativity, then life appears unlucky. But if the mind becomes clear and light, the same life begins to feel full of possibilities. This is where simple symbolic practices like using salt become meaningful. Salt has been used in many cultures as a sign of purification and grounding. It is not the salt itself that brings change, but what it represents to the mind. When a person sits quietly with a bowl of salt and becomes aware of their thoughts, they are actually practicing release. They are allowing themselves to pause, reflect, and let go of emotional weight. In that moment, the salt becomes a reminder that just as impurities can be removed from water or food, the mind can also be cleansed from negativity. The act of placing hands above the salt and breathing slowly is a way to bring attention inward. Each breath becomes a tool to release stress, anger, fear, or confusion. Instead of holding on to these emotions, the mind learns to observe them and let them dissolve. This process is not about superstition or external power, but about awareness and mental discipline. When awareness increases, emotional reactions decrease and clarity begins to grow naturally. Over time, this practice helps a person realize that bad luck is often just a reflection of a disturbed inner state. When the mind is restless, decisions become unclear, energy feels low, and life seems blocked. But when calmness returns, even small actions feel guided and meaningful. This is how inner cleansing slowly transforms perception, making life feel lighter, more balanced, and open to positive change. Salt symbolizes cleansing and grounding. Using salt in a simple ritual represents purification of mind, helping release stress, frustration, and mental negativity. When the mind carries too many thoughts, it becomes like a crowded room where nothing can settle. In such a state, even simple situations feel overwhelming, and life appears to be filled with unseen resistance. Many people interpret this as bad luck, but in deeper understanding, it is often the result of inner imbalance rather than external forces. The second expansion of this practice teaches that clarity of mind is the true foundation of any positive change in life. Without clarity, even opportunities can be missed and even blessings can feel unnoticed. When a person sits quietly with salt as a symbolic tool, the purpose is not to change destiny but to reset awareness. The salt represents stability and purification, reminding the mind that just as physical impurities can be removed, mental clutter can also be released. In this still moment, the individual begins to observe their inner state without judgment. Thoughts of regret, fear, or frustration may arise, but instead of holding on to them, the practice encourages gentle release. This act of letting go creates space inside the mind, and that space is where calmness begins to grow. As breathing becomes slower and deeper, the nervous system naturally starts to relax. This physical calmness supports emotional balance. The mind that was once reactive begins to slow down, and in that slowing down, awareness becomes stronger. This awareness is important because it helps a person see that most suffering is not created by life itself, but by the interpretation of life through stress and expectation. When this understanding becomes clear, the idea of bad luck starts to lose its power. The salt placed in the environment serves as a reminder of intention. It is not an object of force but of reflection. Every time the person sees it, they are reminded to return to stillness, to release unnecessary mental weight, and to remain grounded. Over time, this repeated awareness builds a new mental habit. Instead of reacting with anxiety, the mind begins to respond with patience. Instead of feeling blocked, the person starts to feel open. In this way, clarity becomes a quiet form of strength. Life does not suddenly change from the outside, but the way it is experienced transforms completely. What once felt like constant misfortune slowly turns into a more balanced flow where challenges still exist, but no longer control the mind's peace. Awareness is the real transformation. The ritual itself is not magic. The real power comes from mindful breathing and conscious letting go of negative emotions. When inner awareness deepens, a person begins to notice something very subtle yet powerful. Life does not respond to wishes alone, but to the state of being from which those wishes arise. If the inner world is filled with tension, impatience, or doubt, then even positive efforts feel blocked. But when the inner world becomes steady and calm, actions begin to align more naturally with better outcomes. This understanding is the third layer of the practice, where transformation is not forced but allowed through inner balance. Using salt in this context is a symbolic reminder of purification and simplicity. It is not about changing external fate, but about shifting internal vibration. When a person sits in silence with salt nearby, they are reminded that just as salt preserves and purifies, the mind also has the ability to preserve peace and remove unnecessary emotional decay. This reflection slowly brings attention away from external noise and back to the present moment. In this stillness, thoughts begin to slow down. The mind, which is often running through past regrets and future worries, starts to settle. As this settling happens, a deeper awareness emerges. The person realizes that much of what was considered bad luck was actually a chain reaction of stress-driven decisions, unclear thinking, and emotional reactivity. When the mind is disturbed, perception becomes distorted and even small obstacles feel like major barriers. But when clarity returns, those same obstacles become manageable situations. This practice also teaches patience. Instead of rushing to change life externally, the focus shifts towards stabilizing the inner world first. When the inner world is stable, external actions become more aligned, thoughtful, and effective. Decisions are no longer made from fear, but from understanding. This shift alone can change the direction of many life experiences. Over time, this awareness creates a quiet confidence. The person no longer feels controlled by random events or unseen forces. Instead, there is a growing sense of responsibility toward their own thoughts and emotions. Life is seen less as something happening against them, and more as something responding to them. In this state of balance, what was once interpreted as misfortune begins to dissolve. Not because circumstances always change immediately, but because the mind that experiences them has changed. Setting a pure intention is important. Speaking or thinking a calm intention like releasing burdens and welcoming peace and abundance helps align the mind positively. When a person continues this inner practice with sincerity, something very deep begins to shift in the way life is understood. The fourth stage is not about rituals or objects anymore, but about transformation of perception itself. Salt in this sense becomes only a reminder, not a solution. The real work happens within the quiet spaces of awareness, where thoughts are observed instead of being followed blindly. In this deeper understanding, a person starts to realize that most suffering comes not from events, but from resistance to those events. As the mind becomes more observant, it starts to notice patterns. Certain thoughts repeatedly create stress, certain emotions repeatedly cloud judgment, and certain reactions repeatedly lead to confusion. When these patterns are seen clearly, they naturally begin to lose strength. Awareness acts like light in a dark room. It does not fight the darkness. It simply reveals what is already there. In this way, the idea of bad luck begins to fade because it is no longer seen as something mysterious or external, but as a series of mental and emotional reactions that can be understood and changed. The presence of salt near the space continues to serve as a quiet symbol of cleansing. Each time the mind drifts into negativity, the symbol gently brings attention back to simplicity. It reminds the practitioner that just as physical environments can be cleaned and refreshed, so too can inner environments be reset. But now the focus is less on the object and more on the awareness it inspires. The real purification is happening in how thoughts are noticed, processed, and released. At this stage, the person also begins to understand the importance of non-reactivity. Instead of immediately reacting to situations with fear or frustration, there is a pause. In that pause, clarity has space to arise. This simple shift changes everything. Problems that once felt overwhelming now feel like situations that can be handled step by step. Emotional intensity decreases and thoughtful action increases. Gradually, life starts to feel less like a struggle and more like a flow. Challenges still appear, but they no longer define the inner state. The mind remains steadier even in uncertainty. And in that steadiness, what was once called bad luck is no longer seen as a force controlling life. but as a temporary cloud passing through a much larger sky of awareness and peace. Good fortune flows from inner clarity when the mind becomes calm, clear and balanced. Life naturally feels smoother and positive opportunities seem to appear more easily. At the final stage of understanding, a quiet realization settles in the heart. Nothing outside has the power to define inner peace unless it is allowed. This is where the practice becomes complete, not as a ritual but as a way of living. The salt that was once used as a symbolic tool is now no longer needed, because its meaning has already been absorbed into awareness. The mind has learned the lesson of cleansing, grounding and releasing and now carries it naturally in daily life. In this state, a person no longer depends on external objects or special actions to feel balanced. Instead, every moment becomes an opportunity for awareness. Whether facing difficulty or ease, the mind remains watchful, steady and present. This is where transformation becomes permanent, not because life has stopped changing, but because the inner response to change has matured. The idea of bad luck loses its emotional weight completely because experiences are no longer labeled as good or bad in the same rigid way. Instead of reacting, the mind begins to understand. Instead of resisting, it begins to observe. And in this observation, a deep kind of freedom arises. Life is seen as a flow of experiences, each one temporary, each one passing. Some moments are pleasant, others challenging, but none are permanent enough to disturb inner stillness. This is the true protection from suffering, not control over events, but clarity within perception. The person also begins to notice that their actions naturally improve. Decisions become more thoughtful, communication becomes calmer, and relationships feel less conflicted. This is not because the outside world has changed first, but because the inner state has shifted. A calm mind reflects itself into every action, and those actions create better outcomes over time. What once felt like resistance in life slowly transforms into smoother movement and clearer direction. Even the concept of attracting good fortune becomes simpler. It is no longer seen as something magical or sudden, but as the natural result of a balanced mind. When thoughts are clear, actions are aligned. When actions are aligned, results improve. This simple chain replaces confusion with understanding. In the end, what remains is not belief in rituals, but awareness itself. A steady, quiet awareness that does not depend on conditions. In that awareness, life is no longer seen as controlled by luck, but shaped by presence, clarity, and inner peace.